Over a year ago, I made a video talking about all the traits in Starfield and what I thought were the best and worst traits to have at that time. But after spending hundreds of hours playing this game and 7 major updates, I realized I was wrong about a lot of them, and I think a lot of other people were too. And with Shattered Space out, some of the things have changed, so I thought I'd make a revised video about what I think about all the traits in Starfield, in the form of a tier list. So without further ado, let's begin. Starting with alien DNA. In my original video, I recommended it, but after spending a lot of time playing with this trait, I realized I was wrong, and would like to rescind that recommendation. My original reasoning was that you can get used to the reduced healing and buffs you get from aid and food items, which you can sort of mitigate with skills, in exchange for extra health. Now that's still true. The problem is that the health and oxygen buff is a fixed amount, so as you level up, the health bonus from that trait gets less and less significant, to the point that it actually becomes a detriment than a benefit to your character. Now if this was a percentage buff, I would be singing a different tune, and once you remove it, you'll notice the difference. One thing I didn't know when I made that video was that it also affected your carry capacity buff from food, which is a pretty big deal, and I would have been less eager to recommend it if I had known that. There is also the added oxygen, but with vehicles and fast travel in the game, it doesn't matter as much as it did in the past. Not to mention, you get more O2 buffs from aid items anyways without it. So because of that, I'd put it at C tier at best. It could be really useful at the lower levels, but once you start leveling up and you gain more and more max health, you're probably better off going to a clinic and paying 10k to get it removed. With Dream Home, I originally said I liked it, but now I have mixed feelings about it. Don't get me wrong, the house still looks pretty cool, but as mentioned in the comments, you can get a better house for free by completing the UC faction questline. And also, once you build an outpost, there's not really a reason to go visit your dream home, at least for me. If anything, the dream home is like an outpost, but without the manufacturing or resource extraction. But at least it doesn't count towards your outpost limit. So it's not a bad trait, but it's also not very good. So I'll put this at C tier as well. Or maybe B tier. I don't know, if I had to choose, I think I would pick Dream Home over Alien DNA. So actually I'll upgrade it to B. Empath. Honestly, this is a trait that I never bother using on any of my characters because I don't want to care about what my companions think. So I still maintain that if you're a new player, you should avoid this trait. There are some extra dialogue options that come with this trait, but again, because I've never used it, I can't say how useful they are. But there is a scenario where Empath can be useful. In the May update, Bethesda gave us the ability to respec our characters in New Game Plus. So once you finish the main story and go to New Game Plus, you can change your character's traits. In that situation, you'll probably know the personalities of your various companions, their likes, dislikes, what presses their buttons, literally, and use that to your advantage. You can also just save scum and reload the save if you choose dialogue your companions don't like. Not like it really matters, most choices you make don't really affect the outcome of the game. However, you should only consider choosing this if you're planning to engage in a lot of dialogue in the game. Otherwise, if you want to fuck around, then I would not recommend this trait. So I'd still avoid this trait, but it still has some benefits, so I'll put it at C tier. Next is Extrovert. I'll lump in Introvert as well, as they're polar opposites and mutually exclusive. Originally, I preferred Extrovert over Introvert, but that was before I learned 3 things. Well, technically 2. The third one came out much later. First, there are skills that complement both of these traits. Secondly, asking your companion or crew member to wait here while you do stuff cancels out the introvert penalty. And third, there are vehicles now in this game. If you played Starfield, you probably already know of the isolation and leadership skill. The isolation skill is kind of confusing in how it works, but I think I understand how it works-ish. So despite what the description says, you can have companions and crew members with you, and the skill can still be active. For example, on a planet or in space, whether that's a ship or space station, you can tell your companion to wait here, and as long as your companion is not actively following you, the isolation skill will work. You may have to unequip and re-equip your equipment for it to take effect though. And yet there's another wrinkle, because it turns out the restriction doesn't apply to every companion. You can have an active companion and the skill will still be active. That companion being Vasco. So you get the benefits of a companion helping you out and the buffs as well. Also, despite the fact that it says you can't have crew members, that's actually not true. As long as none of your crew members are story companions, except for Vasco, you'll still get the buff for your ship. The leadership skill is more straightforward. If anything, the leadership skill is more useful to introverts than the isolation skill is to extroverts. And then there's the fact that now that vehicles are in the game, the oxygen penalty just doesn't matter as much as it used to. The only reason I can think of choosing extrovert over introvert is if you're brand new to the game and you want an excuse to get to know your companions more, and you just want to bring them along and do everything with them. And of course, there are some missions where you have to bring a companion with you, so there's that as well. So factoring it all in, I would say that introvert is A tier, maybe even S tier, and extrovert would be a tier below that, because at the end of the day, it's just oxygen, and it is a better choice compared to extrovert. Although there's always gonna be this gem. Next, let's look at all the faction traits. There's 3-star Settler, Neon Street Rat, and UC Native. Generally speaking, they're not bad per se. The extra dialogue is nice to have, and you can use it in New Game Plus to see different extra dialogue options for different factions. But again, knowing how Starfield works, it doesn't have any meaningful effect to the outcome of the story. And if you're under the impression that Neon Street Rat might let you roleplay as a more shady individual, according to Reddit, it doesn't let you do that. And the bonus rewards aren't significant enough for it to be worth it over other traits. But if I had to choose between them, there's only one answer, and that is UC Native. Why? Well, I occasionally dabble in illegal activities. Sometimes I pick up some contraband by accident, you know? But this isn't about contraband, and I definitely did not make a video about how to traffic massive amounts of it, because that would be illegal, and bad. No, this is about Galbank, and since Galbank is UC, robbing Galbank ships won't give you as high of a bounty as a UC Native versus the other faction traits. And I definitely did not make a video on how to rob copious numbers of Galbank Storm Riders, because that would be bad and illegal. So 3-star Settler and Neon Street Rat I would put at B tier. Again, not bad, but not good. And UC Native would be B+. But since there's no B+, I'll round it up to A. Moving on to Hero Warship, in my original video I said he can be very useful, and I still hold that view. I mean, he's one of the few companions who will help you rob a Galbank ship. In fact, he'll do anything with you. After all, he's a free companion, crew member, outpost guy, and at least for me, he's about as annoying as every other companion. Some might find him more annoying, some might find he has a certain charm with being the adoring fan. It's all subjective, but I still think it's one of the better traits. In fact, I think this trait is the only trait with literally no downsides. Unless you're an introvert, which, I mean, you can work around that. So this is an easy S tier. Next is kid stuff. Now, despite what the description says, you don't actually give 2% of your credits to your parents every week. That's because there is a cap on how much you give to your parents. The cap being 500 credits. So if you have 1,000,000 credits, you're not forced to give 20k to your parents, only 500. That's the price of rent for your parents' apartment. The upside is that you get to interact with them and get gifts like a unique weapon, spacesuit, and a ship from your parents, which will be useful early in the game. The downside is, unlike Dream Home, you can't ignore the payments. You have to pay up to 500 credits every week, which isn't a lot of money, but it's also not nothing. And once you get going and you get better gear, the gifts from your parents are gonna collect dust. I mean, I guess you can always sell them. So I would say this is another one of those traits that's not bad, but also not very good. So I'll put it at B tier. Next, let's look at all the religious traits. Raised, Enlightened, and Universal are dog shit. There's barely any extra dialogue, and the only tangible benefit is a box that you can unlock that gives you some books you can't read, some aid items, and a piece of clothing with a minor stat buff. I'm pretty sure Bethesda threw in a box full of trinkets because they know that religion in this game serves no purpose other than as a plot point for the main story. It's not like you can become a space pope. Maybe that's how the devs view religion in real life. If you have Shattered Space, it's still dog shit, but with more dialogue. If you've seen my Shattered Space review, you'll know I didn't touch on those traits in my review, so my experience with it is limited. But from the limited experience I did get from using it, the most consequential new dialogue is basically, I don't want to do it, which is pointless, because that won't advance the main story. Serpent's Embrace though actually has a benefit. You get plus 25 health and oxygen for 4 hours after grav jumping, after which if you don't grav jump, it'll become a debuff. So really you gain 50 health after grav jumping, and it lasts 4 real world hours, unless you go to sleep or wait. It's basically like alien DNA, but temporary, and only half as good. With Shattered Space, you do get a lot more dialogue options, and some of them are actually useful. You can use it to skip persuasion checks or avoid combat, but they're few and far in between. For the most part, the new dialogue lets you roleplay about how much of a true believer you are. So even with Shattered Space, I would put Raised Universal and Enlightened at F tier, and Serpent's Embrace at C, because at least it has some benefits, however minor. Looking at Space and Terra Firma, there is no amount of space stations and spaceships in the game that will ever be enough to justify picking Space over Terra Firma, especially when you consider what's the use of extra oxygen if you're floating in 0G half the time. So Space is an automatic F, but Terra Firma isn't that much better. Again, it only gives you 50 extra health, or subtracts 50 if you're in space. So like Alien DNA, it might be a big deal in the beginning if you're low level, but as you level up, it's gonna matter less and less. So like Alien DNA, I'll put this at C tier. Although you can argue that this could be at least C+, or even B tier, because it doesn't have the med and food penalty like Alien DNA does. Moving to Taskmaster, I'll admit this is another trait I've never used. The downside of having crew members that cost double isn't that big of a deal because you can hire Constellation companions as crew members for free, along with any other potential crew members you encounter throughout the game. And money is not hard to come by. The only thing is I don't know how often the auto repair happens. According to some players, it doesn't happen often enough to justify using it over other traits. So this could be another one of those not bad but also not good traits. So I'm putting this at B. However, I'm open to upgrading this to A tier, maybe even S tier, depending on how often the auto repair occurs. And last but not least, Wanted. This is a trait that can be a pain in the ass early game, but once you've leveled up and got some gear, it could be a good way to get some free loot and a free ship, or a couple if you use a certain combat technique that I've linked in the description. It could get annoying though, especially if you're over encumbered all the time. But I would say this trait is more good than bad. Not to mention that the extra combat can help you complete your skill challenges faster and level up your skills. There's also this extra perk, where if you have low health you do extra damage, which is kinda useless because you're never gonna purposely be near death just to do a little extra damage, and frankly, you probably won't even notice. So unless you're a pacifist or trying to play as a pacifist, I would put this at, this would definitely be A tier. I'd say it's pretty damn close to S tier. Honestly, I might put this at S tier just to populate that tier category. It really depends on how often they show up. And that's all the traits in Starfield. Some traits arguably could be worse or better. Introvert could be S tier depending on playstyle, like if you want to be stealthy. Terra Firma could be higher, Taskmaster could be higher, Wanted could be lower, UC Native could be lower. But hopefully you understand my thought process in this tier list. F tier of course is useless or just objectively bad. C tier traits have a benefit but it's not enough to offset its debuffs, or it's not enough to recommend over other traits. B tier is not bad but not good, very middle of the road. A tier traits are more useful in most circumstances, and S tier is about as close to a must have as you can get. As you can see, most of these traits I would classify as not good. There's only really 3 or 4 traits here that you should use. The rest is down to preference. Or if you're curious what extra dialogue these traits have, whether it be Freestar or Serpent's Embrace for Shattered Space, or Empath. And as mentioned previously, it doesn't help that the health buffs from these traits aren't percentage based. If you had Alien DNA, Terra Firma, and Serpent's Embrace, you only get up to 125 extra health, which is about 6 levels worth of HP. So yeah, that's the tier list. If you enjoyed the video or found this helpful, hit that like button, subscribe and ring that bell. And let me know what you think about this tier list. Do you agree or disagree with the ranking of these traits, or my reasoning? Let me know in the comments below. Given where Starfield is at the moment, I didn't know if it was a good idea to make this video, but I kinda want to because a lot has changed, not just my opinions, but also Shattered Space has been out for a while now, plus there's been several updates, so I might as well make an updated video. Sadly, I don't think there are that many people who are just getting to Starfield at this point, so I don't expect this video to do well. Speaking of Shattered Space though, if you want to know what I think about the newest expansion in Starfield, and whether or not it's worth buying, then I highly recommend you watch this video right here.